it was really a lot of fun for me to come back and do a second edition of The Fall of Interpretation. Partly because it was my first book, and it's fun to go back over a decade and see what I was thinking and what I was doing there. It was encouraging to me because I still think the core argument that interpretation is part and parcel of creaturehood. I think that core argument stands up really well. I think it still has something to contribute. But what I was struck by is what was missing from the book. And I think there are a couple themes that struck me that I wanted to correct or fill in the picture a little bit. And I think these two themes are related. The one is, it's striking how absent the church is in my account. And in some ways, Scripture is oddly absent in my account of interpretation in the first edition. And so that's one of the themes that I wanted to come back and address. But that's tied up with this other theme, which is this. In some ways, The Fall of Interpretation was kind of early on in the conversation of Christians engaging postmodern thought. And this is before the emerging church conversation sort of hit the ground. And at that time, I would say there were sort of two ways that our engagement with postmodernism could go. Bob Weber, of Ancient Future fame, sort of named these, I think, a decade ago. And he said, Christians engaging postmodern thought could either go in a sort of emerging church direction, which would sort of continue to foster certain anti-institutional suspicions and so on, or it could go in what he called this ancient future direction, where actually the postmodern critique of modernity would be an occasion and a catalyst to recover ancient Catholicity. So for me, as I look back on The Fall of Interpretation, it seemed to me that it was ambiguous in the sense that it could have fed into either direction. But in fact, my later work clearly followed that sort of ancient future Catholicity paradigm. So one of the things I've tried to do in this new edition is completely reframe the argument to, first of all, identify those possible trajectories, but and the other trajectory would be, say, the work of John Caputo or Pete Rollins or figures like that. To recognize that in some ways the argument of The Fall of Interpretation could look like it heads in that direction, but in fact I wanted to clarify why and how I thought it should head in this ancient future sort of Catholic postmodernism direction. And so the new introduction really does some work about that and lays out those options. But it's the new chapter that I've appended to the end that really takes seriously the role of the community in framing the context of interpretation. I do that drawing on Derrida again, but actually it's there that the ecclesia comes back into the picture. The ecclesial community now is the context. And so I see this resonating a lot with conversations about the theological interpretation of Scripture. You'll see me in conversation with folks like Hans Boersma and Todd Billings, who are doing, I think, really interesting work. So for me, it almost makes the second edition a different book, because we've recontextualized where it goes. And I hope it will be received into that new conversation.